Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. This week in the news, Vince is my co-pilot. We're discussing a very exciting article called 10 Application Mistakes to Avoid. It's a blog article from Mari McQuaid, a former admission officer at MIT. We're doing something creative. We're doing part 1 this week with Vince and part 2 next week with Julia. Our question from a listener comes from Leslee, and she wants to know more about need-blind colleges. She's following up on a statement I made that was actually inaccurate, and so she gave me a chance to re-explain it in a better way. So good catch on Leslee's part. And for our interview, we have a brand new interview, and it is Ronne Turner, the Vice Provost of Enrollment at WashU, and WashU, very popular school. So for the next 3 weeks, we'll be looking at WashU and trying to understand WashU. And our college spotlight, Sylvia Borgo, is back. It's been almost 9 months, and we're happy to have her back. And we're going international. We're looking at the American University of Paris. Vince, what's new in sunny California, my friend?
Oh, not much. Just trying to get through this chest congestion and from all the rain. I don't know what brought it on or combination of flu or whatever it was, but I'm coming back strong and the sun is finally coming out.
Yay. You take care of yourself, man.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm excited today. We got a great new article we're going to discuss, but before we do, you have generously agreed to give us a tip. Fire away.
All right. Regarding self-reported test scores. And in terms of colleges really realized that the College Board and the ACT were making a killing with multiple sending of test scores. And they realized that that could be cost prohibitive. So this is my shout out to Princeton and Carnegie Mellon and University of Texas at Austin. If you allow students to be test optional, which you all do, I think you should give those who are submitting a test score a break. And they can self-report it like the hundreds of other colleges around the country who allow their students to self-report their test scores. If they're admitted and matriculate, then they send you the official report. But why require those who are actually submitting a test score to send it and have from school to school? It's difficult to track who's self-report or who is you need to send your test score when you report your score. So I'm asking those colleges and for families, make sure you check because you don't want to have submitted an application early action and it says you didn't meet the deadline because they didn't receive your official test scores. So a tip to Carnegie Mellon, Princeton, and University of Texas, Austin, if they self-report, they still have to back it up later, but why require them to send it before they're admitted?
I wish that I could give a tip to admission offices. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. I wish that admission offices would do one of two things. I wish they would hire more admission officers who have been on both sides of the desk so they can get that perspective of, do you know what you're making these kids do?
Yeah.
Or I wish they would at least have advisory boards that would be serious advisory boards where they would meet with groups of people doing what, we do so they can hear from us. And the reason why I say that is, one of my favorite things to do is to ask people when they first flip to the other side of a desk from admissions to college counseling, what did you not know until you got on this side of the fence? And so many times people are like just mortified and aghast at mistakes that they made, things they were doing that were insensitive. And so I just thought of that when you brought this point up. Like, it's the kind of thing that would happen so much less if people weren't so in the ivory tower and disconnected from the consequences of some of these decisions have. And listen, you and I are working with kids where we can do a lot more hand-holding. You have to think about like the kid in the public school with a 600-to-1 ratio. And most of the times the counselor is not trained as a college specialist.
Right.
Like, can you imagine? Like, think about that kid when you put policies in place. But we're preaching at the choir. All right, let me move on to admissions vernacular. And the word, or maybe I should say the acronym, is MATR. MATR. And this is just a code that some schools use. You know how, this, Vince, from being in admissions, how you get these little abbreviations all the time?
Yeah.
MATR, matriculate.
Yes.
And so it stands for likely to matriculate. It's very similar to another admissions vocab we've done in the past, LTE, likely to enroll, that Swarthmore and some other schools use. So some schools use LTE, this kid's likely to enroll. Some schools use MATR, matriculate. I think this kid will matriculate. So, and that's a pretty good segue, because we are going to be talking a little bit about interest again today, as one of the points comes up in our article. And the big number is 85. 85. Vince, do you know there are 85 schools now that are test blind, score free, test free, pick your term?
Wow.
85. Isn't that a lot?
80. Wow. I have to look at that list.
85. Yeah. I mean, everyone knows the UCs.
Yeah.
Some
UCs,
of the,
CSUs. That's, that's like 35 alone.
Sure. That's half the list. That is right there. It's like 23 and 9 or whatever. So, yeah. So, but, that number is going to grow, though, for two reasons. One, well, we all know it's going to happen with the Supreme Court and affirmative action. And two, the birth dearth. I mean, with births being down, schools are finding more and more and more competitive, and they're removing impediments to make it easier to apply.
Wow.
Whether that's not having you write as many essays or get test scores out of here. So I think that is only going to grow. I know it's really controversial because, you can make a case, I think, for all three positions. You can make a case for having scores as an additional common benchmark in the file. You can make a case for test optional, and then you can make a case for test blind. I think there's compelling arguments people can make for all of them. And depending on, how you come down on this, different people have their views on which one they think is better and all that. But 85 schools now and growing. It'll be interesting to see how soon that number hits 100.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
All right, well, let's dive in today. So we have an article I'm really excited about. The article is by Mari McQuaid, and she used to be an admission officer at MIT. She's now an independent educational counselor, and she wrote a really good blog where what she did was she wanted to take a look at what are the reasons why kids went into the no pile, other than their academic numbers weren't strong enough. In other words, when you took a look at kids and they had the grades and they had the curriculum and they had the test scores and they had the grade patterns or grade trends, but they never got in, what were the reasons? And so she wrote an article called 10 College Application Mistakes to Avoid. It's a blog article. And And so what we're doing over the next 2 weeks is Vince is going to kick it off and talk about the first 4. And then Julia will talk about the last 4. And we'll just touch very briefly on the last 2. So we'll touch on all 10, but we're really going to highlight 8 of them, with Vince taking 4 and Julia taking 4. So we've never done this before, Vince. New turf. You split an article between 2 of our esteemed co-hosts. But I think it's gonna be interesting to our listeners. So what I'm gonna do is just in most cases the points are not too long, so I'll read them, and then Vince, you can bequeath your wisdom to us. Does that work for you?
Sounds great.
All right. So the first one is leaving out vital personal details. So here's what Marie says. Context is everything in the admission process. Applicants from low socioeconomic backgrounds or whose parents did not attend college are measured with a different yardstick than affluent applicants who had numerous opportunities for personal and academic growth and exploration. The applicant who spends several hours every day babysitting younger children, or who has to work 25 hours a week to help with family finances, may not have the same academic or extracurricular profile of peers in the applicant pool. That said, when put in context, babysitting or other part-time jobs can be considered an extracurricular activity. So the point she's making is leaving out personal vital details, so it's the person who doesn't understand that that's something that admission offers want to hear about. She goes on to say, context is much more nuanced than socioeconomic circumstances alone. Reflect on your circumstance. Try to see it from an objective point of view. What is your community like? What kind of home life do you have? What family responsibilities do you shoulder? Let colleges know. Help the admissions committee to imagine you in your context in as full and rich a way as possible. Applicants who leave out this vital personal backstory often lose out in the admissions game. Vince, what say you?
Great point. And, I can think of, 2 particular stories that really illuminate the point. One of them, the individual who applied came from a very privileged background. If you look at the zip code, you look at the independent school that they went to. But the story that I didn't really learn until we were close to submission. So maybe in October, it really illuminated the point that it's really important to tell people both in your activities, and we did include it in essays because it was such a terrific story about her ability to care for others. And so we learned that her grandparent had Alzheimer's, her husband had died, her grandfather had passed away. And at night, this person, and again, I didn't know this until we got really close to submission. She actually slept by the door, the
Wow.
young woman, and because her grandmother would be asleep all day, and then at night she would wake up and she would always try to leave and go look for her husband. And so the young woman throughout high school from 9th through 12th, she was right there by the door. And many a time she would stop her grandmother from leaving the house or going out into the backyard and falling into the pool. But it really spoke to who she was, and including that story, I think, would really place that student in a much different context. And she ended up having great options. But if I hadn't known that fact and we hadn't reported it and talked about what that meant to her, I think it would have definitely been a missed opportunity. The other story that comes to mind was a young woman who, during the pandemic, her family had great difficulty, the parents supporting the number of people in the house. So she would wake up, or she would do her homework, take a nap, and then at 11 p.m. she would go out with her father, who would pick up vegetables in downtown LA, and then they would deliver them to restaurants in Riverside County. So she would get home around 3 or 4 in the morning, get a few more hours of sleep, and then go to school and do excellent work. But she didn't have that in her activities. She if she had not told that story, she would not be at the University of California today. When I heard the story, and I just thought to myself, we don't want to leave this one on the table, because this shows what you're willing to do to help others who are trying to help you. So those two stories, filling out the context, allowing people into your life so they can see who you are authentically, is so important and can really make a difference. And both those students, one has graduated from college, the first young woman, and the second young woman is thriving at a UC today. So I'm glad we told that story.
Vince, I'm glad you told those two stories. And that's, I was just listening to you, and I was just thinking, I just feel really privileged to work with you and Julia and, the whole team, Lisa, Linda, Susan, everybody, Dave. I had to change the description right up for Your Cloud's My Kid. I started counting, and I realized there's like 150 years of college admissions experience on our team. And so I put that in there,
Yeah.
The co-hosts have 150 years of experience, and it just comes through, that you're able to just grab two incredibly poignant and powerful stories. And that's exactly what she's talking about here. My favorite part of what she says, you demonstrated it. It's what we tell everybody to do when they're writing. Show it, don't tell it. And I love this line when she says, let the college help the admissions committee to imagine you in your context in as full and rich a way as possible. And that's what you have to do. You have to, I'm always telling my students all the time, write in a multi-sensory way. And I give them examples of past students I've worked with that do it really, really well. Write in a multi-sensory way. The mind's a picture gallery. It's not an encyclopedia of facts. So write in a way so they see it, and so they smell it and taste it, and they feel it, and they feel those emotions. And that's what is powerful. It's human beings on the other end, not robots. So that's good stuff. I love it. Now let's go to number 2. Your essays are one-sided. So here's what Marie says on this point. Have you thought about what you bring to the college and its campus life? Make sure your essays don't just address what the college can do for you, but also how you can contribute to their community. When applicable, do you give credit to your teachers, mentors, bosses, and others who have shepherded you along the way? It's okay to point out weaknesses in your high school, but remember to be respectful and never blame your school for your own shortcomings. So what do you want to say on this one, Vince?
I have two stories. One speaks to...
You've set the bar high after that last group of two.
The first one I'm thinking of, the person had done a great deed, and they brought in to a school where most of the students, about 92% of the students, receive free lunch, and she wanted to partner with a school where they had this entrepreneurship club, and they were looking for vibrant speakers. But because of where the school was located, they were having trouble getting people to commit to coming to share their stories about entrepreneurship, especially in tech. And this student partnered with them, and she found this great Latina engineer entrepreneur who'd started her own company. And it was such a great story. But the way she told it, I literally, in the 250 word essay, she used the word "I" probably 52 times. So it sounded
sure it's not 52.4176.
and she made it sound, she had partnered with students from the school. The woman who delivered the speech was really inspirational. She had overcome lots of barriers. So we had to step back and look at the ways that she had collaborated. We had to talk about what she took away from, because she wasn't the ethnicity of the students that she was working with. We had to sort of step back and see what she had learned from being in this environment that was very different from her own high school. So we had to take a moment and engender some reflection, so it didn't sound like she was marching in and giving this content by herself, because there were a lot of people that had supported her this effort, and it was really successful. But the way she presented it, it was I, and not we, and we had to incorporate some of that. So that was an important story to tell as well. And I think the other thing that's really important in the way that you're presenting yourself, once you've sort of gotten an idea in an application, you're interested in STEM, you don't have to in every situation, because your activities, probably your counselor, maybe one of your essays will touch on how you got there. But if everything shouts, I want to be an aeronautical engineer, and there's no chance to see the fuller person or the whole person, I think that can be a missed opportunity. When you just hammer it over their head, okay, I'm ready for this major, you may be not helping them see all sides of yourself.
No, good points. And I want to make a couple other points as well. The last point she brings up, she says, it's okay to point out weaknesses in your high school, but remember to be respectful and never blame your school for your shortcomings.
Mm-hmm.
Too many times students want to blame a teacher for low grade or blame the administration for something. And that's not a good look. You don't want to be that dude, or you don't want to be that dudess. You don't want to be that person, because schools, I think they're so used to being misunderstood themselves, they're going to generally give a school the benefit of the doubt. And I think they sort of reflexively react against that. It comes off like excuse making and whining and carping. And so that's one thing. Another thing that she says here, now this, I'm going to reverse it a little bit. I'm going to actually draw out a different point. So she says here, make sure your essays don't just address what the college can do for you, but also how you can contribute. I find a lot of times people don't address as much as they should what the college can do for them. And I find a lot of schools, and you'll see it right in their rating rubrics, they're oftentimes looking for who can we be transformational in, of the people in the applicant, for whom can we be transformational and be a difference maker? And I think sometimes people miss an opportunity to, of course you need to talk about, and hopefully show it and have it come out through references and activities and everything, how you can make an impact, but also to show how you'll take advantage of all the opportunities that they have. I actually don't see it. I don't see enough of that. And I find, especially at a lot more selective schools, that is something that they want to, that's part of their, almost, mission is too strong of a word, but it's part of their sense of purpose, I guess, that we want to put somebody on a different sort of life trajectory if we can, by exposing them to our resources. And if they sort of feel like, well, this person, I'm not really sort of seeing what we can do for them, that they're not going to get already come with or whatever, then I think there's less opportunity to have that oomph there. Does that make any sense, Vince?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't feel like I articulate that well at all. So if you followed me, good for you. I was bumbling and stumbling over all kind of words. It wasn't coming out.
Well, it sort of prompted another way to think about this. I remember there was a young woman who she left her high school because she didn't understand why it might be inappropriate to record without the teacher's knowledge how they were teaching, and both in video and audio recording.
Video.
And she didn't understand why that was not the best thing to do. And she saw it as, in her mind, she thought she was being Norma Ray, trying to, bust open, the corrupt company and show their poor labor practices, I guess. But I said to her, you have to look at it from the standpoint of the institution that is admitting you. Nobody, there were, there were probably 10 other things you could have done with this teacher before you resorted to recording them. And from what I can tell, from what you told me, you didn't try any of those methods yet. So in terms of being one-sided, when there's a story to tell, just make sure you're putting yourself in the light in which you want to be portrayed. The way she saw it, she was totally justified. But if she had sent that essay, she never would have landed where she did, because they would have said, we're not going to have somebody who doesn't understand why this is not the way that you interact with the world.
Yeah, I mean, people have to realize that your essays for most schools are the equivalent of an interview. It feels like a job offer or something. I mean, this is the place to really get to know you. And I love the language Susan always used, to bring yourself to life.
Yeah.
This is the opportunity to bring yourself to life. And this is where schools learn about your personal qualities and they hear you in your own voice. And so if that voice ends up going in any direction that reveals undesirable personal qualities, like maybe, entitlement or excuse making or lack of ownership over one's actions, that's a bad look. That's a bad look. All right, let's go on to the next one. Lacking ambition and vision. So here's what Murray says on this point. One thing that would send an MIT app to the no pile pretty quickly for me was an applicant who would say they want to study at MIT so they can get a good job after graduation. Of course, schools read applications contextually. For the first-generation college students, going to a premier college and getting a well-paying job is ambitious. Readers know this and adjust their thinking accordingly. However, it's easier to offer admission to someone who has a compelling vision for the future and who convinces the reader that they will do something great with their education. I love this point. What do you want to say on this one, Vince?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And one thing that we try to do when working with students, before you write the essays, after you've worked on your activities and created your resume, is try to develop sort of a thesis statement or a persona. So last year, one of the personas was, somebody who wanted to be an aeronautical engineer to bring the gift of flight and being in space to those who haven't had that experience. And their activities really supported this. They developed during the pandemic. They used current technology and they combined some things so little kids could learn to fly using the technology that they had merged together. And they brought that to a program at LAX. They brought it to a local church. They brought the technology to the Burn Center. So you're getting all these kids. And what was interesting is this person, he realized that he could bring it to underserved communities because one of the least diverse professional spaces are airline pilots. So he started to bring the technology into communities and organizations where maybe those students hadn't imagined ever becoming a pilot or flying planes or engineering planes. And so he was opening up a whole new world. So his persona was the person who he loved flying. I mean, he loved planes. His graduation party was right by LAX and we could see the planes land, like literally from the place that he had his graduation reception. So he loved it so much that he wanted to share it with students who couldn't imagine themselves having that opportunity, and his activities supported that. So with that overarching theme, that's how we built his application so that he could share with admissions people that he had this vision. And it wasn't just so he could work at Boeing or Airbus or whatever it was, but it was to bring the gift of flight to those who never experienced it before. And it was just a beautiful persona.
Yeah. I refer to this as your compelling narrative. And you once said something, you and I were just talking once, and you were talking about Dave, our co-host, and you're like, he says a lot of profound things that sometimes I forget this guy wasn't in admissions. Do you remember telling me that?
Yes.
He said that to me one time. We're having a conversation, and he said, you want to know what colleges want? They want people who are going to change the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had that same aha moment when he said that. I was like, Dave, that's really profound. And that's really what she's talking about here is like the idea that I'll be a millionaire by 30. That's a lot of ambition in there. That'd be a great accomplishment. It's not necessarily going to impress a school. Show that you have a vision beyond me, myself, and I
Mm-hmm.
to have impact. And the other piece that's really important is really what Vince brought up is that it's cohesive and that you see compelling evidence throughout the whole application of what Vince calls persona, what I refer to as your compelling narrative. It's really the same thing. It's when an admission officer opens a file, one of the things they're trying to do is understand who that person is. And when the whole thing comes together with a tapestry of sort of unity or consistent reinforcement, and I'm talking about things like really everything, but certainly from the courses that you take to the activities that you participate in, to what you do in your summers, to the clubs that you join, to what your rec writers say. When all of that presents one consistent picture, it builds trust.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, the opposite is also true. If there is no coherence, no consistency, it's all over the place, then you really don't know what you're getting. It's the equivalent of somebody whose grades go from like A's to D's to, B minuses back to C pluses. And I'm like, now you're all over the place. It's like the roller coaster grade profile. And that's, now the one thing that I want to say, and I find this particularly true when I'm working in affluent communities, especially certain private school affluent communities, there's almost this, I don't know if I want to say guilt. Guilt's probably too strong of a word. There's the sense that students feel like their privilege is going to work against them in the admission process. And so many of them want to start a charity, or they want to do some kind of work with like the underprivileged. And look, that's fantastic if it's genuine. But I find it's really important that is backed up by reinforcement by all of these things, and that it's not something that just starts spring of junior year, or you will not be given the benefit of the doubt for it being anything other than resume building. Any thoughts on that, Vince?
Yeah, I think that is so important to say. And I think that one thing that really helped this student that I told the story about is that I helped him think about ways that he could expand the technology that he built and bring it into communities, because his natural inclination was really not to think about that, because he didn't realize he didn't have the lenses of all this experience. So I helped him think about, like, look at the people who are teaching you about flying and aviation. And he said, yeah, it's not the most diverse space. So we did a little research, and then he realized, oh, it's not a diverse space at all. So early on, once we developed it, we talked about expanding its reach to communities that didn't have those opportunities. So, and that started happening by the end of sophomore year. So I think you're right. They have to see a history that's is the earlier you start, the better. And I do think there's a little bit of forgiveness for students if it comes in junior year, but there has to be a legitimate connection to that community and evidence of that, either in the activities or the essay, for sure.
No, that's fair, especially if, let's say, it starts in junior year, particularly fall of junior year, but even sometimes spring. If it happens and then there's reinforcement, so maybe you didn't discover this thing until then, and then maybe you do something in the summer consistent with that, or once again, recommendation writers can really have a really big role in who gets in and who doesn't, particularly at schools that require them. When you're hearing things from those outside substantiators that reinforce things, whether it's outside rec or a school rec, that also can play a role. But it's about trust.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about trust. It's about like, what is this person? What do they care about, and what are they bringing to the community? And is there enough evidence here that I know what that is? And the other thing I want to talk about, because this is really important, what Vince and I are talking about here is taking who somebody is authentically and identifying their strengths, and then talking about how you bring those strengths out in a way that can present a compelling narrative or a persona. It's very different from what some counselors do, which, Vince, Susan, our whole team,
Linda, Lisa, and Julia,
we're all against, which is some counselors, they start with the starting point of, okay, German is an undersubscribed major at this school, so we need to make you look like you're the biggest German scholar, and we're going to start this in middle school. And it doesn't necessarily matter if you are or not. That's what we're going to do, because that's going to be your ticket to get in. That is not what we're talking about. And I just want to make that really, really clear. We're talking about first identifying things people genuinely are interested in, and then talk about, okay, how can we show consistency throughout the whole application so that that will become compelling.
Yes. And then broaden that vision. So when you're developing that compelling narrative or persona, it comes across as, it's more than I want to make $1 million $10 million by the time I'm 30, but I want to bring the gift of flight to people who never imagined that they could make that possible. I
find it's more powerful when it can leave the walls of your school.
Yes.
Nothing's wrong with it being in the walls of your school, but when that vision can extend beyond the walls of your school, that to whether it's national or state or regional, but that's when it comes across like it's more of a conviction and also just more impact. And schools are motivated by people who impact their space.
Mm-hmm.
All right, last one, Vince. This is a really, really important one as well. Lack of familiarity with the school. Demonstrated interest is crucial. I just love this because this is coming from MIT, the place that oftentimes claim they don't track demonstrated interest. So I love to see an ex-admission officer kind of come clean and blow the whistle on that one. Here's what she says. Most colleges use some sort of admissions rubric to evaluate their applicant pool. Some schools factor in the amount of interest an applicant seems to have for the school, demonstrated interest, into their rating systems. Colleges want to admit students who genuinely know and like the school and might actually attend if admitted. This also helps improve their yield rates, which is a priority for every college because it impacts the placement rankings list, and it can also influence the bond ratings. An important piece of demonstrated interest is your answer to the school's version of the Why This College essay, which is so frequently asked by schools that have college-specific essays. Your essay should be full of specific details about the academic programs, student activities that attract you to that school, and how you would contribute to the school community. If you haven't investigated the school thoroughly, your essay will be bland and may even come across as insincere. Vince, what say you?
I think this piece is more important than people realize. And this is where
definitely
it's so important to figure out ways to educate your parent population, because a lot of parents, depending on their experience, they filter all of the information about college admissions through their own experience. And, if they were applying the 80s or 90s to college, it was a very different landscape. And I think they don't realize that because of technology, that colleges can figure out how interested you are. And they have built metrics to determine how interested a student and a family is by being able to look at those metrics. And they send you emails. They could give you a grade on the student who's opening their emails, particularly when it pertains to the things that they've indicated when they requested information that they were interested in. But I think what it means is you need to think of this as a dating relationship. You're getting to know one another. They're looking to see, did you show up at the high school visit? If we had a group meeting in your city, and that's the only thing that the college really does, did you show up? Are you connecting with us by requesting information? Are you, and I've seen this in a lot of colleges, now you can request information from the particular school. So if you're interested in the School of Kinesiology at Michigan, you can request information, and I'm sure they look. Virtual information sessions, virtual tours, they have some kind of thing that you log into. So you log into them so they know that you were there and that you're interacting with them. Campus visit is really crucial when you apply. So strategy, early decision, early action. And, I think it also comes in, I don't know this for sure, but this is more an intuitive feeling. I think they look at your portal and they look at how often are you checking to see what they're putting in there. I remember Babson, they put in their portal for 1 week. Oh, we're offering interviews. And if you didn't respond, that was just one way, I'm sure, of them thinking. Luckily, my student happened to open the portal for the first time during that week. He got the interview and he got into Babson. So demonstrated interest. We can't take every customer who walks in the store. And we're looking for the customer who has really built a good relationship with the college. So in these essays where they talk about demonstrated interest, when you demonstrate that you have a roadmap, that you have a plan, that you've indicated, these courses, doing research with this professor, joining these organizations that are part of Ross at Michigan, then they can believe that it's more likely for you to enroll. So, but you can't just show up at the door and say, "Oh, I'm here to take you to prom." That's not going to work. You have to build and nurture and cultivate your relationship with the colleges. That's why it's important to build a manageable list. You can't, entertain 26 different people at the same time. And so why you think you would be able to manage an application list of 20 to 30 colleges just really isn't means you haven't done your homework and figured out what you want to do.
Well, along those lines, I like to talk about two different sides of a coin. Demonstrated interest is MATR, right? Will the student matriculate? LTE, likely to enroll.
Right.
But there's the other side, which is DU, demonstrated understanding. And that is, do you understand who we are?
Mm-hmm.
And can you present a compelling case that what you're looking for and where you'll thrive is in our culture?
Mm-hmm.
I like to say to people, a school could be looking at the student. They could think this is the most incredible mind they've ever seen academically. Character could be just sterling. Extracurriculars could be off the chain. But if they think something like, every indication is that this student was not going to do well in an urban environment, or we're an urban school, or this student's not going to do well in a rural environment, or we're a rural school. They're not going to do well in a small school or a big school or a single gender, or they need more of an athletic program, whatever it is. If they feel like what you're looking for is not what we offer, there's a very good chance you're not getting in because of this other side, demonstrated understanding. You haven't convinced me that you get who we are and what you're looking for is what we offer. So that's the thing. One reason why these essays are so powerful is they give you a school a chance to test both DI and DU all together. And I think people really underestimate how high the bar is on these essays. You have to be very, very granular, very specific. I like to tell my students, Vince, every line of that essay, every sentence should be something that could only pertain to that school. So, this small liberal arts, small classes, interdisciplinary, discussion-based, all of this stuff, diverse. This is like you just described hundreds and hundreds of schools.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's not cutting it.
Right.
The other thing I like to tell my students is not in a braggadocious way, but in a subtle way. I like to see some knowledge that is revealed in one of these why the school essays that has the admission officer thinking, man, I'm impressed that this student knows that about us.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like that.
Yes.
That's when the lights go off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you, I'm throwing out all kind of tips today. One really good place I find to get that stuff is from the institutional research section.
Mm.
They can have some great studies in there and reports and stuff, and a student can share and they can connect something they learn in there to their interests. And I'm like, I doubt very many people are saying this, but that's when that aha moment can go off. Like, it's really both. It's this student just gets us, and they've presented a compelling case that they're a match for who we are. And also, I think there's a good chance the student will come if we admit them.
Yeah.
And so the bar is very, very high. Think about it. Think about it from a human standpoint. They're reading the same 200-word essay over and over and over again. Human nature is just so easy to get bored. I'm sure you can relate to that, Vince, and you're reading, whether it was at Pomona or Oxy or whatever. You read the same thing over and over again, that all of a sudden somebody comes with a unique and creative approach and it feels authentic. Mm-hmm. That's when it can really pop.
Right. My secret is to have the student, especially if the college has developed a good website for a particular academic department.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one.
And they have student profiles where where a student in that particular major, they profile, I remember one school, they had, 20 profiles in sports management. And you could look at the profile, and I was just amazed by all the tidbits you could pull out from the students' mouths, from their own words, describing the opportunities and how they took advantage of them. Those student profiles or the alumni profiles can really help you project into the future how your, UT education or Michigan sports management education.
Hey man, you're coming with a little bit too much Michigan for me today, dude.
I think it's fresh on the mind since it's due today.
A little too fresh.
Too fresh. But those student profiles, they can give you the roadmap because the students lay out what their experience was and what they took advantage of. That's a great tip.
No, that is a fantastic tip. I thought you went even a level deeper. I thought you were going to just talk about the value of the department website, which is really rich.
Yes.
What you can learn at the department website. But you went even deeper by talking about student profiles on the department page. So we need to wind this up, Vince, but this has been a real rich conversation. I feel like this was kind of, sort of like admissions grad school level, not elementary. But you know what's really great? This is one thing I've learned about our podcast, because we're really long. I mean, like 2 hours on Thursday, an hour on Monday. Our whole motto, making college knowledge available for all. But you know what I've learned? We attract an audience that wants that depth. I mean, I'm looking at these Speakpipe questions people are sending in. This is higher level stuff. This is not just your average parent. And so, while this is more grad level kind of conversation, I think our audience is down for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who are willing to put themselves out there and do the work, there's ways that you can tap into the information that schools are giving families. And if you can just find those little pockets of I don't know, lots of gold, you can strike it rich.
Vince, I can't wait for you next week, man. You can bring the heat next month. You can bring the heat like you've raised the bar, man. This is good stuff. So see you next month, my friend.
All right. Great talking with you.
Thank you.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
This next question is from Leslee from California.
Hi, this is Leslee in California. Recently on the podcast, Mark made the statement that a total of 0 to 5 schools truly are need blind. But there are, of course, way more schools that say they are need blind. While I'm curious about which schools make the cut in his view, my real question is this. If, in fact, only a handful of the many schools that say they are need blind really are need blind, what is happening in the admissions offices of all the other schools, especially with a student they would like to admit but who needs significant aid? Thank you so much.
Leslee, I am so glad to get a clarification of your question, actually, because you know what it does, Lisa? It reminds me of just how careful we have to be with every word we say. Remember we had a Speakpipe question a few weeks ago when someone says, I hang on your every word. Remember that?
Yes.
I'm like, that's a lot of responsibility. And so this is one time when I misspoke. So let me clarify what I should have said, and then I can answer the question. So first of all, let me go into a definition. Need blind means that we don't look at your wallet when we make admissions decisions. So when we're looking at who we're getting in and who we're admitting, who we're not admitting, we don't look at ability to pay. Okay, so that's need blind. The reality is the majority of schools are actually need blind. Most public schools are need blind. The problem is they do what we call gap you. Right. And what gap means is that if the financial forms come back and say you could afford $30,000, they ask you to pay $40,000. So they gapped you by $10,000, which is the difference between what the form said you could pay and what they asked you to pay. So most schools just gap. That's the overwhelming majority. They don't do it out of maliciousness. They just don't have enough money to meet a family's full financial need. So there's another term that people often confuse with gapping, and that is, do you meet 100% of full demonstrated or calculated need? Mm-hmm. That's a much shorter list. Right. You know, you'll see 70 to 80 schools somewhere around there that claim that we meet 100% of demonstrated need. Now, there's a lot of manipulation sometimes that goes on. That's a prestigious list that people want to be on, because if you're judged by the company you keep, it's all the prestigious schools in the world, in the country. So a lot of people want to be on that list. And also, it sounds a lot better when you're talking to a student and we say, apply to us, we meet full demonstrated need, versus, we might not meet your financial needs, so just take a shot and we'll see if it works out. So it's both a really good talking point, and schools like to be a part of that group. Now, what I meant to say is there's a very short list of schools that are both need blind and meet full demonstrated need. That's what I meant to say. And the number of schools that even claim both of those things, you'll see different lists, but it's under 30. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I made the point that it's probably closer to 0 to 5. And I meant to say that are both need blind and meet full demonstrated need. And I would say it's closer to 0 than to 5. So let me tell you why. Well, and I have to give credit where credit is due. One of my favorite interviews I've ever done, I strongly encourage you guys to go back and listen. It's interview 39. If you go to yourcollegeblindkid.com, is Peter Van Buskirk, who was the VP of Enrollment at Franklin and Marshall. And he basically talked about, in the interview, it was like things admissions officers won't tell you that really go on behind the scenes is really the topic. And then we got into this whole thing. And I'd been having a kind of a debate with Peter for a few years. I'd see him at conferences like SACAC and NACAC and things, that we would continue to debate each other. And I used to take the position that his position, was there are no need blind colleges. And I'd be like, well, I think there are a few. How can you say there are none? But I have come to believe his view. And this is Peter's view. Saying that you're need blind and you meet full demonstrated need is an absolute position. It's the equivalent of, are you pregnant or not? There's no such thing as being a little bit pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. So schools love to say we meet full demonstrated need and we're need blind because they want to be in that club. And it's like impressive to say that to kids. But here's the problem with that. Well, let's just take international students alone.
Mm-hmm.
There are only 7 schools that are even claiming that they are need blind and meet full demonstrated need for US and international. Only 7 even claim it. Amherst, Bowdoin, Dartmouth, Harvard, MIT, Princeton, and Yale. Bowdoin just announced that about a month or two ago. So there were 6 before Bowdoin jumped on that list. So if we're looking at just for internationals, in other words, the point that Peter brought up, which I'm convinced of, don't tell me you're need blind and you meet full demonstrated need, but it doesn't apply to internationals. All right. Now let's go a step further. Lots of schools will tell you that it doesn't apply to transfers. Well, it doesn't apply to transfers. It's only first year. And the point is, are you a little bit pregnant or are you pregnant? Do you meet full demonstrated need and you're need blind? Why do you keep having all these exceptions? Common exceptions are transfers, international students, and the third big one is the wait list. Almost no school says we meet full demonstrated need, and we're need blind, and that applies to our wait list. They run out of money, and then the wait list goes to people that can pay the full freight. So for all of those reasons, Peter has convinced me there really aren't any schools. Princeton would be the closest to it because, as David Jelinas, Director of Financial Aid at Davidson, said to me once, Princeton's got more money than God. So they just really do have more money than anybody else. They just do. But they would be the closest. But when you look at what schools do with waitlists and international and transfer, and no. And even Yale. So Yale's on this list, but Yale looks at home equity. And, you have people in places, let's say California, your house might have gone up and might have 500,000 or 600,000 in equity, but you might not make a lot of money. And then they'll turn around and ask you to pay an astronomical number. And on paper, technically, they say we meet full demonstrated need. But in the real world, if I make $90,000, I can't afford to give you 70. Okay.
Right.
And you say, well, you got money in your house, but that's not real money.
Right.
I tap into it and then it drops, in the housing market. So that's not how people feel. So it's a little bit of word gimmickry going on here. And I'll tell you the point where Peter really convinced me there's really nobody. And if you go back and hear that interview, I think you'll like it if you haven't heard that one. So as a nonprofit organization, you have to show your budget to the federal government to show that you're not taking in a profit. So you have to submit your income statements every year, your accountants do. And you have to show that your expenses, that you're not bringing in more money than you're spending and that everything lines up. And for every school, that financial aid line is one of the biggest numbers in the budget. So what business could possibly have to balance its books and have this super high line item that they can just ignore and not worry about it if it jumps 30 million from one year to the next? Nobody can really do that.
Mm-hmm.
So the reality is, does it mean that someone is reading your file and thinking about your money all the time? No, most of the time they're not. They're just not thinking about that. They might admit you and then they gap you and you get it, the financial aid package does not line up to your needs. In most instances, are schools trying their best to meet full demonstrated need? Yes, but they're constrained by their budgets. So the question that also came up in this question by Leslee is, well, what does this practically mean? So what it practically means is that when a college is building out its recruitment philosophy and plan, they are targeting more wealthy communities because they know that they'll get enough people there that can pay and they'll stay within budget. So it impacts recruitment. It impacts where they go. That's probably the single biggest thing, is it can impact the fairs they go to, the schools they visit, the relationships they have counselors with. That's the single biggest thing. Any questions, thoughts, comments, Lisa?
No, I think it's really hard for, your average family to get through all the nuances on this. And I think, perhaps it's purposely left opaque. Because as you say, like a school defines what your need is, and they can define it kind of however they want. And so as you give this example of the home equity, it might not be accurate. I've been reading the book Poison Ivies by Evan Mandry, and he does a wonderful job of talking about all of this and how schools really do like recruit in wealthier areas. They don't go visit the other areas. And they're really trying to, craft a class where they have the appearance of giving financial support, but it's not to as many kids as you would think.
Well, and the other thing to keep in mind is the average admission rep, they feel very, very uncomfortable with this. They don't like all this business stuff. That stuff really happens, most of the time at a level beyond them. They just know that they love students and they love meeting students, and maybe they love their school and they want to bring great students into their school. They're not comfortable with the idea that we have to take into consideration the fact that this family can pay and this family can't pay, or if we don't get enough people that can pay, we're going to have layoffs. Or they don't like to think that way. They don't want to see the world through that prism. So, and a lot of times more senior people know that. They don't even necessarily tell the younger admission officers all that business stuff.
Right.
That stuff you usually have to climb upward into the higher ranks of the admission offices to learn about how much all the underbelly of the way that money comes into play. So I don't want you to think like this conniving, manipulating, slick, salesperson's not telling me the full, the lowdown. Like, one, they may not even know it, and two, they're incredibly uncomfortable with it if they find out, and they don't like it even one bit at all. And they just wish their school had more money so that they didn't have to do that. So I just want to say that so that there's not any sort of resentment toward, admission officers, if that makes any sense.
Right. No, I think it's a policy decision. It's not an individual admission officer decision. And, you're absolutely right. It's just sort of a meta decision that the school has made about what direction they're going.
Even more than a policy, I agree. I don't disagree with you, Lisa. It's a resource decision.
Right.
So a lot of times I'll use this example, when I'm talking to families. I'll say, you're a triplet and you're really close. All three of you guys are really close. And you just found out that you need to replace a new roof and you didn't have the insurance and it's going to cost you $10,000. And so, you reach out to your two siblings and they love you equally. But one of them is like, hey, I can throw $300, but that's kind of about all I have right now. Like, I don't know how I'm going to make rent this month. And then another one's like, I got you, I got the 10 grand. It's not like one sibling loved you more than the other. One just happened to have more resources so they could do more things with the resources. So that's just something to keep in mind. And I am a believer that people should be looking at the resources of a school. The resources of a school come into play in a lot of ways. And it's not just a matter of will the school survive or not. It's like what level of services can they provide for you?
Right.
When it comes to everything from the career center to academic support services to retention and faculty and being able to get the top faculty. I think the average person doesn't realize how much resources, there is a correlation between the resources of an institution and what they're able to do for educating your child. And so it's more about a resource thing, and the schools that don't have the money, they would love to be able to do what the schools that do have the money can do. Friends, I really liked this session, Lisa and I did, but when I was editing it, I felt like I answered more the first part of Leslee's question, about explaining why I feel so few schools are truly need blind. And by the way, you'll see all kinds of numbers all over the place. If you Google how many need blind colleges are out there, a lot of people answer that assuming need blind and also combining it with meeting demonstrated need. But technically, those are two different things and you should separate them. So I felt like I did a pretty good job explaining the first part of Leslee's question, but the second part I didn't do as good of a job. So she asked what is happening in college admissions for someone who needs significant aid. And so I want to point to a few things. One, what's happening there is gapping. And I did mention gapping in the answer, but that is just so prevalent. I had a student a couple of years ago that had no money at all. It's a KIPP student. I didn't recommend this, by the way, but they applied to LSU and got zero money back in a $52,000 bill. They got gapped $52,000. It was a zero EFC student. So gapping is incredibly prevalent. So you got to be careful of that. Talked about that already. The other thing is Parent Plus loans. So it's very common for a school to just give you Parent Plus loans in your aid award. The problem with Parent Plus loans are twofold. One, they're expensive. Okay, they're an expensive loan with a high origination fee and a high interest rate. They're also not protected from a lot of the things you see, like loan forgiveness, things like that you see. Those have not been extending to Parent Plus loans. But there's a third problem with Parent Plus loans, which is you're not guaranteed to automatically receive them. They put them, some schools package them in their aid awards as a way of showing you how you can afford college. But you have to actually qualify for them. Now, they're not extremely hard to qualify. It's really if you've had what's called adverse circumstances is what keeps you from qualifying for a Parent Plus loan. But the bottom line is it's not free money, and there may not even be a way you could use it even if you wanted to use it. And I don't recommend them. Only in rare circumstances do I recommend them. So that's a common problem a common way that schools address somebody who needs significant aids. First, gapping. Second, Parent Plus loans. Third, we've talked about schools being need aware, and that means that you just may not get in because of finances. Usually waitlisted, not denied. But if you don't have the ability to pay, you apply to a need aware school, which are oftentimes private schools. One of the reasons that you might not have got in is because you couldn't pay. So that could happen to you, so harder to get in. And then another thing, and this doesn't happen this often, I don't want to scare people, probably need to talk about this more, something called front loading the grant. So what that means is that you get a better package your first year than you get in subsequent years. And one way you can get some sense as to whether schools do that is go to a website like College Navigator and look at the average grants for first-year students versus students in subsequent years. Now, you can't completely just go by that and say, gotcha. I see a difference, because sometimes people lose scholarships, but they don't qualify for the 3.0 standard or whatever in year 2 or 3. But if you see a big disparity, there's a good chance the school is doing what we call front-loading the grant. So hopefully that's a more thorough answer to the second part of your question, Leslee. All I really talked about was that they travel to areas where people can pay. And I wanted to give you a more substantial answer to that part. So hopefully that was helpful. Anything else, or do we wrap that one up?
I think we wrapped it up. And again, 10 minutes on the dot.
Now I'm a pro. I'm going to pound my chest.
Let's try shaving it down to 9 minutes next time.
No. You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Know when to walk away. And know when to run. Showing off my little Kenny Rogers here.
Oh yeah, that's real current, Mark.
Well, it's better than not knowing anything.
It is true, like it is.
I don't have movies. I have to have some stick besides sports.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear all those Kenny Rogers analogies.
No, that was my one. That's my only one. That's why I was trying to show it off. All right. We'll see you next week with a couple more Speakpipe questions. Thanks.
See you next week.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
And for our interview, we have a brand new interview, and it is Ronne Turner, the Vice Provost of Enrollment at WashU. And WashU, very popular school. So for the next 3 weeks, we'll be looking at WashU and trying to understand WashU. Friends, you're in for a treat today. I'm here with Ronne Turner from the great WashU in St. Louis. How are you, Ronne?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Great. So Ronne actually committed to do this interview over the summer, and I sort of procrastinated in setting it up. But then why don't you share? You have a role at the College Board. What's your role at the College Board? We got the chance to talk at the College Board conference.
Yeah. Well, yes, I am, or the past chair of the Board of Trustees for the College Board. It's a 2-year term. And so in October, we had our national forum, and I moved from chair to past chair. So I have two more years as past chair.
Yeah, so it's great just getting a chance to meet you in person. But we've got a lot to talk about today because WashU's a hot school, and we want to try to unearth it and let our listeners know what they don't know. But before we do that, We like a little history, so we're believers in history at Your College Bound Kid. So tell us a little bit about your background, any educational roles you've had, whatever you want to share, but just a little bit so listeners will sort of understand the context from which you speak.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I know, as you said, we first talked about this during the summer, and I'm glad we are able to connect and do that now. So, just a little bit about me. I've been working in college admissions. I did the math for 35
Good
years,
for you.
and I don't admit that very often.
Well, you know how they say 3 or 30? People go into this for 3 or 30. You've already exceeded that.
Absolutely. Like most people who do enrollment and admissions work, this was not something that I planned. I kind of fell into it. But I really love the work. I really love having the opportunity to connect students with higher education. My parents instilled in me the importance of higher education. And so it just feels right to do this type of work. I am not a first generation kid. My mom actually went to college. She graduated from a historically Black college, but she was the only one on both sides of our family that went to.
Which one?
She went to Livingstone College
Okay.
in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And so, again, she was the only one on both sides of our family that went to college. And, I've just watched over the years as folks, students that I've worked with, relatives, as they've gotten a higher education, it just transforms their lives. So this is why I do that work. What else?
Well, I'm sure you weren't at WashU all 35 years. You want to tell us
No.
and some of your stops along the way?
Yes, I've been at 4 different universities. I worked at my alma mater for a couple of years, which was Johns Hopkins University. Then I went and worked at the University of Maryland, College Park, flagship large public. And then I was at Northeastern University, a large private institution that became increasingly selective over the years, and now here at WashU. So what I really like is working at different types of institutions. I think that broadens my experience and helps me serve students and families better.
No, that's great. And those are 4 great institutions. So thanks for sharing that. And speaking of hot schools, you mentioned Northeastern, but I'd say WashU feels pretty hot these days. As I've personally noticed, kids I used to send and get in don't always get in anymore. So your apps are up. Your endowment's been growing. We spoke about that about a year ago on the podcast where you had that huge surge in your endowment. And, I personally used to get asked mostly about Northwestern and Chicago for sort of your top-notch students that were from outside the Midwest looking at the Midwest. But now I'm asked just as much about WashU. So how did that happen?
Well, I really like that you are being asked just as much about WashU now. I think we're a school. We have a lot of momentum right now. We have a new chancellor who started in 2019, our provost in 2020. And there's really an institutional commitment at WashU to making the experience great for our undergraduate students. And we're focused a lot right now on first generation students from limited resources. We're also doing some work with rural students, excuse me. We've offered an exceptional academic program. Our campus, if you've never been, it is stunningly beautiful. We've got some great facilities. It's really an ideal setting for students who want to grow, who want to challenge themselves, and who really want to be in a supportive learning environment.
One thing you guys do really well, I can attest to this, and I'm sure you're continuing to do this, is your counselor fly-in program. I got a chance to be part of that in 2015, and you flew like 70 counselors in from 23 states and 4 countries. And it was really spectacular, and it really upped my referrals after that because I could see it, feel it. And yeah, you guys are in the conversation for the most beautiful campus in the country, in my opinion. So I'm sure that's a big part of your draw. Are you still doing that counselor fly-in?
We are, and I'm sorry I missed you. I got to WashU in 2016, so I missed you by a year, but we're still doing the counselor fly-in. We're actually starting it up again this year. We'll be inviting a group to join us in March. Obviously, we paused
Sure.
because of the pandemic, but we're really excited to get started again. School counselors are, in general, college counselors are just so important to helping students find the right match. So we definitely want to help them understand us.
Awesome. So if you were doing a high school visit and meeting with 15 students and one of them said, tell me about WashU and how is it distinctively different from other universities? I guess this is maybe the elevator pitch question or the mission question. I mean, I'll let you take it where you want to go. How would you answer that?
Yeah, that's such a fun question, particularly for an institution that is a lot like a lot of other private institutions. We're medium-sized, obviously private. We highly ranked, offer great programs. But for us, and I hinted at this a little bit when I was talking about WashU earlier, but one of the things that really makes us different, what makes us stand out, are the people. We have a community here of undergraduates, of students and faculty. We really work to help students achieve their goals and to make connections. We love to see each other succeed. It's a very supportive environment. Our undergraduate students are cheering each other on. Obviously, faculty and staff are cheering our students on. Our students really champion each other. There's never a sense at WashU that someone is not going to be supportive or someone's trying to tear you down. We believe that everybody can be successful and everybody has different goals and different outcomes that they're looking for. And so we all can be successful at the things that matter to us. So our community, I think, is really what makes us distinctive.
Awesome. Love that answer.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
The recommended resource for episode 301 is a Twitter feed, and it is at College Board. That's right, just simply at College Board. Now, I realize the College Board is very controversial, but their Twitter feed has a lot of really valuable information in it. For example, they did a session with a bunch of experts on how much will college really afford, and you would have had access to it if you had been following their Twitter feed recently. They also have a lot of times college planning to-dos for juniors and seniors. They have an up-and-coming webinar called Is a STEM Career in Your Future? So if you want to be apprised of those kinds of things, plus if you want to follow the controversy they're embroiled in with DeSantis and the African-American AP course they're launching, it's a good place to get updates on things like that. So once again, it's just at College Board. It's maybe the largest Twitter feed of any educational Twitter feed out there. Over 200,000 people subscribe, and they're pretty active with updates. So it's one I recommend that you add and follow.
And, one of our listeners sent this in once. It was for another school, but I kind of liked it. I've borrowed it and used it a few times. And the question went something like this. I believe every school has a personality. Can you ask such and such school? And I can't even remember what the school was at this time, what their personality is. But I've kind of borrowed that question and I like it. So how would you describe WashU's personality?
That's a great question. I would describe us, our personality, as a kind, collaborative, striving place. We're also, I think, humble. And sometimes I think we're too humble for our own good, but it's a humble place. It's filled with people who are hardworking, who are intelligent, who are creative. But that kind and collaborative spirit, I think, is really important on our campus.
Were those some of the things that drew you there? Like when you were looking, like what were the things that drew you there? Besides, of course, the big paycheck, but other than that.
So when I came, there were a couple things that struck me when I was interviewing for this position. First, it was the institution's commitment to diversity, really trying to increase the numbers of students who are coming from underrepresented backgrounds, whether it's students coming from limited income backgrounds, first generation, underrepresented students of color. That was something that drew me. The campus really is beautiful.
I know.
And I've been at a lot of different campuses. And so I thought, as I was walking around, I thought, wow. And then the students that I met, they were challenging. They asked the toughest questions in the interview, but they were so kind about the way they asked it and what they were trying to get at and how much they cared about the institution and the person that was going to be in this role. And so that really sold me. It was the students. They're just incredible. Our students are smart. They work hard. They are driven, but they're like kind, which I just love.
Well, it may be a little bit of Midwest nice, as they say, you know? You're coming from hard charging East Coast, which can have a bit of an edge to it sometimes. And I say that as someone who moved from Philadelphia to Atlanta.
But that's really interesting because we have a lot of students here from both of the coast, right? Sometimes people think of us as only a school with a lot of Midwesterners, but we have students from all over the United States and the world. And so I just think that we attract students who want to be in that type of environment. When I talk to students about their college choices, I talk with them about what type of an environment that they want to be in and how are they motivated. There are some people that are motivated by being in a very competitive environment, right? They love that. They thrive on that, and trying to, do better than the other person. And then I think there are other people who aren't like that, and they want to support people, and so I think that's the types of students that we attract from that personality perspective.
I think that's fair because I'm sure you still have this, but I know you used to have this map, and it had like spiral rings out to the West Coast, to the Southeast, to the East, and all parts of the country, and it really showed how you really are pulling. I mean, not almost equally from like all regions of the country. It was not, it's not normal to see a school sort of with that full geographic pull. Do you know what I'm talking about? Because I know this is around after 15. It was a marketing piece that you guys had.
Well, we typically have some sort of map in our marketing pieces
Right,
to show
right.
where students are coming from. So I'm not sure if the one that you're thinking about is the one that we show now. But I like to tell people that California is typically one or two, the state that sends us the most students. And I know California is a large state, but we're getting a lot of students from California, and it'll go back and forth between California, Illinois, sometimes Missouri, but and then New York, and so we get students from everywhere.
Good stuff. So let's talk about your different schools. So I know you have the Olin School of Business. What would you like our listeners to know about the Olin School of Business?
Well, the Olin School of Business is consistently ranked one of the best four-year undergraduate business schools that are out there. We admit students directly into the BSBA program, which I think is, and sometimes can be unique at institutions. So there are like 6 majors and minors, lots of flexibility there. And I want to highlight 2 things. There's a global mindset component as part of the undergraduate degree. So our students are going to get a global perspective, whether they're traveling abroad or they're doing something here in the classroom. And we also have experiential learning embedded in the curriculum. One of the things that I love about our business program is that students can take courses where teams of our students are paired with Fortune 500 companies, nonprofit organizations, and startups that are looking for some pro bono management expertise. And so they'll often get a real world problem, and part of their course is to give that advice to those corporations or organizations that they're working with. And I think that's a really interesting thing. The other thing I want to point out, and I'll do this is if you ask me questions about our other programs,
Sure.
is I'll tell you a little bit. Calculus exposure is important for the admissions process. So if your listeners are going to a school that offers calculus and they have the opportunity to take it and they're interested in business at WashU, we're looking for students to have some calculus exposure because it is a quantitative based curriculum in our Olin School of Business.
And that's pretty typical for highly selective business programs. I find what's not always common, though, is what you mentioned earlier, is being a direct admit. So for those of you who don't know, most business programs, you have to apply into the school, usually sometime in your sophomore year. And so that can add an element of stress if you want to go to school for business and you get into the college and then the university, and then you don't get into the business program. Now you have a dilemma. Do you transfer? Do you switch majors? Do you try again, maybe extend a year or two? So it can reduce stress, and it can also get you more into your coursework sometimes earlier for schools that do direct admit. I'm a huge direct admit fan, and that's true whether it's, nursing or business or any major. So I love to hear that.
Yeah, I want to just jump in there and say, even though we are a direct admit to the business program, we also know that sometimes students don't really know what they want to study when they go to college. And the Olin School of Business does admit internal transfer students.
Nice.
And we have a lot of students who will do minors in business. They major in something else and will do a minor in business. So there's lots of opportunity for students to get business experience, even if they don't know they want it right after high school.
So what does that pathway look like? Like, you've got a student, they didn't know what they wanted to do, they get to WashU, they decide they want to do business. What kind of academic profile are you looking for, or experiences? Like, what's that application process like to do an internal transfer, whatever term you use for it?
Yeah. So for a student to change their major into business, they typically have to petition, and petition is too strong of a word, but they have to get in touch with the undergraduate dean in that particular division, whether it's business or any other division. Business will tell you specifically that, they want you to have some specific courses. And so if you're interested, you can do that. You can, look on their website and see what those things are, if you have an inkling for business. And they will have a GPA requirement for business. And again, they will spell that out and put that on the website. It can sometimes change. And so you have to check out the website to transfer into business. And they take as many students as they can. And if not, they work with those students to have a minor in the business program. And so we'll have a lot of students that are doing that. At WashU, you can't change your major until after you complete your first semester at the university. We want students, we don't want students to sort of game the process because it can be a little bit more challenging to get into one of our divisions than others. But we want them to sincerely explore. But as you are exploring and you find that you're interested in something else, we do make it very easy for students to change their major or have a minor or do a concentration. So we're very flexible in that way.
Great. Well, let's talk about another one of your schools, which is the McKelvey School of Engineering. What can you tell us about that school?
So obviously, McKelvey is another direct entry institution, a division at the university. We have 12 majors, 15 minors, everything from traditional engineering, like civil and electrical, to some newer programs like environmental engineering. We also have biomedical engineering. Computer science and biomed are particularly popular programs within the School of Engineering. I would say computer science is probably the most popular. We have a lot of students who enter engineering to do computer science engineering, which is obviously within the McKelvey School of Engineering, but we also have a lot of students who pick up a minor in computer science. Engineering students have benefited from some development on campus recently. We call it our East End development, and they have some new engineering buildings and labs, as well as new makerspace. So it's a wonderful school that offers flexibility and a lot of support with students. There's a lot of student engineering clubs, and doing projects and research is available. So it's a great school. And typical, like most engineering programs, we're looking for students who have strong science. We're looking for that physics exposure as well as calculus.
One thing I've personally really loved about WashU, and I've had a lot of students go to your school, by the way, several there now as well. I've always felt like you're really balanced between sort of, you have arts, social science, humanities, business, engineering, and there's opportunities for students to take courses in all of these areas, and it feels very balanced. Friends, this concludes the first part of our 3-part interview. I hope you'll join us next week for part 2 of 3.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, I had planned on doing University of Redland Spotlight here. I tried to go 9 in a row in my visits to California, but I ran out of gas without taking a break. So I was a little overly ambitious, but we'll be back with University of Redlands next week. The good news for you is we still have a special treat. Sylvia Borgo is back, and the American University of Paris is what she'll be talking about. So you get an international spotlight. Friends, Sylvia Borgo from San Diego is back. When were you last on, Sylvia? It feels like it's been a year.
It definitely was May. It hasn't been quite a year. I remember my last college spotlight was for the University of San Diego, and that was in May.
Well, yeah, in the past, Sylvia's been a California girl a lot. Some ways like Vince, you've done San Diego for us. You've done UCLA, where, of course, you graduated from. And then you did another school, didn't you? Did you do a second San Diego school for us? Am I thinking that or not?
Yes, my first college spotlight was the University of California, San Diego, UC San Diego.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that. And then, of course, University of San Diego. And I've teased out at some point Point Loma. It's the other San Diego school that I sometimes have kids look at. But today, we're going international. So why don't you tell our listeners what we're going to talk about?
Yes, I have such an exciting college spotlight, I think. It is on the fabulous American University in Paris. And some of you might be thinking, well, AUP is not in San Diego or California. What's going on here? My family and I had the immense privilege to live in Paris for 5 weeks last summer, which was an incredible experience. And I had the opportunity to tour American University in Paris. And it was a really fantastic experience.
Yeah, and if you know anything about Sylvia, she is a traveler at heart. I remember when she told me her goal was to get to 50 countries by your 50th birthday. And I think you might maybe not quite make it, but I think you're over 40. I think you hit 40.
I will be traveling to number 46 and number 47 in March.
How cool is that? Where are you going?
I'm going to Scotland and Croatia. I have never been to either of those. So I'll be heading there. I definitely will come back. I know Kevin Newton is the resident expert on British and Scottish universities, and I think he's fabulous. But I'm hoping to, of course, visit several Scottish universities, University of Edinburgh, University of Glasgow, and St. Andrews. And I'll also be spending a little bit of time in London. Of course, I've already been there, but hopefully I'll get some universities in there as well.
Yeah. Maybe even get Aberdeen in as well if you get a chance as well. It's another good one there. Yeah, so Sylvia approached me with the idea, like, I'd love to do an international school. I'm going to travel. I'll be there. And I'm like, let's do it. So you take this wherever you want to go.
Okay. I'm going to follow the good old Your College Bound Kid format. I'm going to start off with some basics. American University in Paris is actually the oldest American university abroad. It was chartered in 1962. And it has been, it's the only continuously accredited institution for the last 50 years in Europe. So that's really exciting. It is a small school with just over 1,100 students. And some of your listeners may be asking, well, what is an American University abroad? And AUP, American University in Paris, is not the only American university abroad. Some of the more maybe well-known to some of your listeners could be John Cabot in Rome, Bard College in Berlin, and certainly Franklin University, Webster University, as well in Switzerland. Those are some of the big heavy hitters I think that might pop up in people's mind. But essentially, what an American university abroad is, it's an American university taught in the American style that is fully accredited. And it offers classes in English. So even though AUP is based in Paris, all the curriculum, if you're taking a math course, if you're taking a sociology course, if you're taking a psychology course, that would be in English. They have a flexibility in the program. They do follow the American model, meaning you have electives and you might have the core, of course, meaning you'll need an English course and you'll need some sort of math course, etc. So they follow the English model of education. And of course, because it's abroad, they have a multicultural program component, a lens to a lot of their learning. Something that might be a little unique to the American universities abroad that sometimes is not present at many international universities is that they do have this robust support system, much like you might find here in the States. You know, you'll have a career office and you'll have a mental health office and so forth. And we'll get into a little bit of those support services later on.
I have a question for you about that. Do you feel the similarities to the Americans, is that more because the philosophy is aligned with the American philosophy, or is that also a function of the size of the school? Because so many of those international schools are large. Being a smaller school, it's a lot easier to be high touch.
Yeah, no, I wonder, I'm not an expert on some of these American universities. As a matter of fact, AUP was on my radar for a long, long time. I have a neighbor whose son went there years ago, and that's kind of the first time that it came on my radar. But I feel like many of the international schools abroad, the American international schools abroad, are sometimes quite small. I mean, they're definitely not 30,000
for the American
40,000.
Ones. Sure.
Yeah, the American ones, exactly.
And would you say SLU Madrid? Would that be another one that, are you familiar with that? St. Louis University at Madrid?
Yeah. I know that there are also there's the component of some of these American programs that are affiliated with the college or university in the U.S. And so that's kind of another arm of this whole education abroad, which I think is really exciting as well. So back to your question, can they have these support services because they are a small university? And I think it goes more with the philosophy that this is what
I was thinking.
And may I say that even though of course it's called American University in Paris, which I'm going to call it that, I want to say that I'm gonna say U.S. students because I have friends in all parts of the Americas, whether that be Central and South America, and they always raise their hand and they're like, "Hey, we're American too."
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I'm going to go ahead and say yes. The high touch model is because that's what the U.S. students are typically looking for, of course. And what's really exciting about AUP and many of these American universities abroad is that they have similar admission requirements and similar admission and application process. As a matter of fact, AUP takes the Common App. So we'll get into that a little bit. Can I tell you about the location of where?
Of course you can. You're driving the ship here.
Okay. So Paris,
Steering the ship.
right? It's just... I have to say, I'll stop here and say that this is the third time I was in Paris. And the first two times I did not have the best time. But this time we just had an amazing time. And I have several possible reasons or guesses why that might have been. But AUP is located in the 7th arrondissement. How do you like my French there?
Pretty good.
Arrondissement really just means like a borough or a neighborhood or like a little district. So it's located in the 7th, which is fairly close to the Eiffel Tower. It has a very residential feel, much more quiet. Even though Paris is an incredibly urban city, you'll find these little like nooks. You'll find these little side streets and these little boroughs that might be a little bit more quiet. It's definitely a little posh. It's definitely, a very kind of upscale part of Paris. Nice shops, nice cafes, bakeries, and so forth. And it's about 10 minutes in terms of like the locations of the actual buildings because it has the feel of NYU, for example, where all the different buildings are on different blocks. So it's really a part of the city rather than having its own dedicated enclosed campus. from one end of the campus to another is about a 10-minute walk. So that's the furthest point of the two buildings that are the farthest apart, about 10-minute walk.
Do you have a sense the reasons why people choose to go there?
Oh, so many great reasons. Honestly, if I was 17 years old, 18 years old, I may not choose necessarily an international college abroad. There's just so much to navigate, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't guess why some of these fantastic students attend, but it's such a powerhouse in terms of like international anything for academics. It offers 26 majors. In several colleges. I believe there's 4 main colleges or 8, really, depending on how you want to split them up. There's the arts and communications, business and econ, science and psychology, politics and history. And within those, you'll have a lot of courses in global communications, for example. So you have not just communications, but global communications. In terms of business, you don't just have management and finance, you have international finance, you have international economics, international business administration. So really the type of student that might want to go to AUP really probably already has a very keen interest in the global academic lens that they use, which I think is really exciting.
And is the student body like all Americans, or what would the demographics of the student body be like?
Absolutely. So let me jump to the demographics here. I have my little outline. The demographics.
You're ready for me.
I'm ready. So like I mentioned, it's about 1,100 students. That's including graduate students, which are a smaller percentage of the population. It's primarily undergraduate. As a matter of fact, they only have 6 master's programs. Again, wouldn't you guess, with an international focus, global focus. But the student demographics, this was mind-blowing. So, hold on to your hats, because they come from the class of 2022 that just entered, so college first years. There are 109 nationalities represented. Wow. Yeah, 65 languages spoken on campus, by students. About 50% are from the US. About 15% are from France. About 15% are from the EU. And that leaves us with 20% outside of the US and outside of the European Union. So that's incredibly diverse right there. Yeah, that's fantastic.
So do you think that students are going because they just want to be in Paris? Do you think they're going for this international experience with this eclectic mixture of students from all over the world and the strength of the global education?
Yeah, no, that's a great question.
Them there? Mm-hmm.
Again, I can't speak for the students, but they were very clear in their information session right before the tour and so forth. And I was the only non-parent with a child or non-student. Sure. Everybody else was there visiting for a very specific reason, which was to get to know the college. And it was very clear that in their information session, that they wanted to let the students know that they had to be incredibly mature, incredibly self-sufficient, obviously adventurous, and really global thinkers. And don't let me forget, I want to mention how that global thinking will translate to the application in a second. So I get a sense that the students are looking for something else than just no disrespect to U.S. colleges, because as you know, my son is at a U.S. college, no disrespect to them, but just something different than like going to college, living in the res halls, joining, the marching band, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Really, really adventurous, I think, souls. There is also, I'm jumping around a little bit here, so I apologize, but there is also in the academic program there's a partnership with USC, the University of Southern California, where you can do, I believe it's a year. Gosh, I know it's definitely a semester. Let me see. It's called the Trojan Transfer Program. And also there's a partnership with Tulane and a partnership with George Washington. Their Paris Scholars Program, that is 1 year at AUP, and then you head on over to George Washington. So USC has a transfer program. And when I met with the representative, the local representative here in San Diego, they did say that about 30% of their population after a year heads on over to USC. So I don't know if that's what their mission was. I'll go to Paris first and then transfer on over to USC, which is where I initially wanted to end up, maybe closer to home or California, wherever it might be.
I had a student last year who wanted to go to USC and didn't get in, but USC told them about the AUP program.
Yeah.
And so it's the first time they ever heard about it. So USC's telling some of the students that a transfer pathway could be available for you in year 2 if you go over here. And so that's what kind of got them excited about it. I have not had anybody actually do that yet. And I'm really curious actually how difficult that is, because I read all the correspondence and it made it seem pretty straightforward, but I always got a sense that there might be a little bit. I mean, I know there's GPA minimums that you have to hit.
Yeah, 3.7 for the Trojan transfer plan, minimum.
Yeah.
And if a student really, USC, they had their heart set on it for whatever reason, the program or their parents were alum or whatnot, and they're very strong students, I could see why they're like, well, why they would say, sure, take me to Paris for a year. I will do very, very well because I'm already, a dedicated student. I'll receive my 3.7 or above, certainly above. And then come on back. I mean, what a great, experience. I'm not even going to say adventure, just a great experience.
And I think I might have shared this on the podcast before, so forgive me if this is repetitive, but one of the families I worked with last year, and I'm working with them again because I have a second kid, the dad he hires a lot of people. And he said one thing he looks for is that a student really stepped outside their comfort zone in college. He loves to see people that went to another country, did something like this. He said, I think it reveals a certain something about them, that they're that adventuresome and that self-confident to willing to venture out there. And so we actually were just talking about it the week before last again, because I told him I'm always quoting you. He's not a podcast listener, but I told him I'm always quoting you on that. He's like, well, I believe it. He hires hundreds of people. So he's just found that, I can't say every employer thinks the same way he does, but he's just found that he gets really interesting, adventuresome people that have an understanding of the world and a broad-mindedness that makes them a good fit, at least for his company. What about cost? What can you talk to me about cost? Do you have any knowledge of that, Sylvia?
Yeah, absolutely. But before I mention that, I did want to mention there's 3 other universities that have partnerships with AUP, and that's University of San Francisco, Denison, and Wellesley. They're not as robust, I guess I'm going to say, as the USC Trojan Transfer Plan or Tulane, which is a spring admit, or the Paris Scholars for George Washington. Those are a little bit more solidified, those programs, it seems like. And yeah, just to piggyback on what you said about the family that you're working with, the hiring person that really loves students who have stepped outside of their comfort zone. They do mention AUP that they have 88% of their graduates are employed upon graduation. And their alumni network is 20,000 strong in over 145 countries. 20,000 may not seem as that much compared to, let's say University of Pennsylvania or Penn State even. But that's not bad for just a small school. But anyway, let's see here. Cost. Yes, that is important to note. I'm going to quote both euro and I had to transfer it over to US dollars as well.
Better you than me.
Yes.
You're the one who lived there for 5 weeks. I'd be in trouble.
Oh, it's actually, the dollar is so strong right now. California, really all of the United States we've been suffering through the recession and gas prices and all of those situations. I think California has been pretty hard hit as well. I mean, I know our gas prices are at least $2 or $3 more per gallon.
Yes, I was just there and I almost had cardiac arrest when I literally was driving in the bus and I saw the gas price and I pulled my camera phone out to take a picture.
Yeah, no. So it's quite expensive here. So that's all to say that when we were in Paris, I always thought oh gosh, how are we going to survive in Paris? It's such an expensive city, and it actually is very comparable to California prices or less, to be honest. You can get a baguette. As a matter of fact, it's government law, or I don't know if you have to get a baguette for 99 cents.
Whoa.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that whole like, well, no one will starve on our watch.
That's pretty cool. I like that.
So not too bad. And my good friend mentioned that to me because he was there in Paris as well. And he mentioned that little fact. Okay, so tuition and fees. That is going to be 34,000 euros a year, tuition and fees, which translate right now to about $36,000 a year. For tuition and fees. And then you add on top of that room and board, which is another 19,000 euros. So again, about $20,000, $21,000, and making it a total of about 53,000 euros, if I'm doing my math right, somewhere around there, which would be about $56,000 US dollars a year. Now, because it is an American institution, it is an accredited American institution, you can use the FAFSA. So if you have financial need or loans or grants or work studies or that will all transfer over. So they use the FAFSA. And as a matter of fact, they require the FAFSA for a couple of their scholarships that combine not only merit, so the highly qualified academic students who have demonstrated need, they have some generous scholarships there. Something interesting, if I may, with this scholarships, if your student is in the IB program and they're a strong student in and predicted and can have a predicted score of about 44 or 45, which is very high, you have automatically full tuition covered if you can score a 44, 45 on your IB exam. And that's their top scholarship, the International Baccalaureate Scholarship. And after that, there are some smaller scholarships. On average, I would say the average scholarship is about $6,000 to $8,000 or so, which covers about a fourth or a fifth of the tuition.
What about sports? Do they have sports over there?
So very similar. Walking. If walking was a sport, you would have. Paris is so fantastic. It was not unusual for me to get like 10 miles every day of walking.
Wow.
Yeah. So sports. That is the one thing that, again, if a student is looking for more of a traditional U.S. model, this might be where this and residential life may be where it's the most different and distinct. They do have clubs. For example, some of their most popular clubs or the ones that they highlighted on the tour were the recycling club, the LGBTQ plus club, the wine appreciation club. That shouldn't surprise you because it's Paris. The fashion club, again, shouldn't surprise you. So just some really great and interesting clubs there, which kind of speak to the culture of France and Paris and so forth. In terms of athletics, they do have teams. They're not like Division I, of course, but it's really more of like the club and intramural level teams that you might find at U.S. institutions.
Well, Sylvia, this has been great. Is there anything else that you haven't said that you want to share with our listeners? It's been a...
Oh, I said I was going to come back to support services.
Yeah, come back there. I know that you have made me really want to visit.
Well, you have to. It's an absolutely fantastic city. So the support services, this is where we were talking about how U.S. students can feel supported. They have a housing office, which will help with housing. As a matter of fact, I can briefly mention that as well. They have a learning support center. They have a counseling office, career coaching, and we got a chance to visit. And it looks fantastic. I mean, very well developed. They have financial aid office. One of the top benefits, healthcare comes with your tuition and fees.
Nice.
And also you can have a guaranteed minimum wage job, very similar to many other international institutions. You can work about 20% of the time during the regular school year, and then 100% of a full work week if you're on summer break. But in terms of the residential life, this is where I was really surprised and actually pleasantly surprised. The residential life office will help with housing. It is required to take American University in Paris, AUP's housing is required for the first year. And you have several options for housing. You could have an entire building of just AUP students with a resident assistant. That's one option. Another option would be having an entire building, again, that would be a combination of AUP students and others. That could be neighborhood folk, but you would definitely have a component of AUP students there. And then, this is super exciting, they also have a hotel option. You could live in one of the hotels along the Champs-Élysées, and you would have the floor. One floor would be only for AUP students, and then all the other floors for like the hotel guests. And that has all been vetted. A few years ago, I did attend a webinar, and they did say that you could also live with a family, either completely English-speaking family or a completely French-speaking family. But that wasn't mentioned on our tour last time I was there. And families have been vetted in the past, but I'm not 100% sure that's still an option. But that's it.
Well, this is awesome. Really exciting. Glad to get a few more international schools. When you're on our website and you go into spotlights and you hit all spotlights, that international group is a little scant for me. So we're happy to add another one to the mix. And all I know is you got me excited. And so if you got me excited, you probably got some others excited as well. So thank you so much, Sylvia. I really appreciate you coming back on here.
Thank you, Mark. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, yeah. And it was great seeing you in September in Houston. Take care.
Take care, Mark.
Bye. Friends, on Monday's episode, Higher Ed Updates return. We'll also have a Speakpipe question that one of you sent in that Lisa and I will answer. And we have a brand new interview, and it's one that I'm very excited about. Lisa is the leader, and she interviews Kirby McKilliar, and they look at the topic of how a student can know what college major is right for them. It's a fantastic interview, and it's also entertaining, so get ready to laugh. And, of course, I close out with Black History, famous Black American, which I'm doing all of February, leaves us with a quote, and it's Dr. Mae Jemison. Love this one. Short, sweet, and powerful. Never be limited by other people's limited imaginations. Did you catch that? Never be limited by other people's limited imaginations. You could add for you. See you Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.